Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fifth webinar of Spring 2020 Social Entrepreneurship for Innovation in Health course. This week, we are going to continue our discussion on the theme of co-creation with specific focus on idea development and pitching. Before we start the session, two key heads up for everybody. Please don't forget to take the survey if you're watching us live. You get extra points for watching us live. And also, please don't forget to drop your question for our guest expert in the discussion forum. Also, if you experience any tech glitches, please don't forget to refresh your browser. I'm very pleased to welcome our guest expert for today, Mark Cheng. He is Ashoka's Global Director for Social Finance. He has been an investment banker who has facilitated over US $250 million investment into social ventures. So we have all the reasons to learn from him the art of idea development and pitching. Welcome, Mark. How are you?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Indrani. Thank you very much indeed.
Great. Mark, you have a rich portfolio of success and incredible lessons that we will want to learn from you, from your academic qualification of what you studied and how you have stepped up into the current role at Ashoka. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey?
Okay. Yes, it's a little bit random, to be honest. So I studied economics and philosophy at university, and I never expected actually to be working in the social investment space. In fact, when I graduated from university, it didn't really exist at that time. And so I had quite a conventional career as an investment banker and worked for a number of banks for a number of years. And I always thought that I would sort of end up in somewhere like the World Bank, sort of to do development work. That was really my passion and my interest. And one of the books that I read that kind of changed my life was the biography of Professor Muhammad Yunus, who's the founder, of course, of the whole microfinance movement, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I remember reading this back in the late 90s, and he was basically describing how, as an economist, he had launched an experiment where he was lending to poor rural women in Bangladesh. And he basically created an entire new financing model for how to create impact and lift people out of poverty. And that made such a huge impression on me that I always thought that's what I wanted to do. But it wasn't until the financial crisis in 2008, when I was working at an insurance company at the time, that the global markets essentially shut down. And suddenly I had a bit of time on my hands. It's a bit not dissimilar to what we're experiencing right now, where you go through a period of thinking, where do you really want to go next? And clearly there's going to be a lot of disruption. There's going to be a lot of change that's taking place. And where that left me was that at that time I came across Ashoka, this global network for social entrepreneurs around the world. And it was I approached Ashoka and I met a number of the Ashoka fellows, and I started to meet these people called social entrepreneurs who were creating business models to solve social problems. And Ashoka asked me whether I would act as a business advisor to some of those fellows. So that was how I really got involved. This was back in 2008 as really a business volunteer. And my goal was to work with a number of these entrepreneurs and really understand what issues they were struggling with. And no surprise, right? You ask any entrepreneur, what's the biggest bottleneck to preventing you from growing? And the answer is finance. It's fundraising. Everybody's struggling for funding. Everybody needs to work out how to pitch their idea, how to unlock sources of finance. And so there was no shortage of need from entrepreneurs who were developing new business models and wanted to pitch these ideas. And one of the things that I realized very quickly was that social entrepreneurs in particular had a difficult time doing this, because by definition, they want to create an investable business, but at the same time, really what they're doing is trying to change the world through a social mission. And the conflict that each one of them was trapped in was, how do you do both, right? How do you persuade investors that you're going to create massive impact, but you're also going to be helping them to develop their business plans and their ideas, and then explain those ideas to investors in a way that would speak to the language of investors. So that's really how I got started in this field. My first work was with a healthcare entrepreneur, a gentleman named David Greene, whose company. His competitors were pricing at $300 per lens. And he came in as a social business and priced at $3.50. And,
Wow.
and, and
Okay.
he was still able to be profitable doing this, but he was doing it as a social mission because what he wanted to do was to reach as many people in rural India as possible. And that was what it was. But he didn't want to do it as a charity. He wanted to do it as a business. And so the company that he launched essentially drove the world market price for these lenses down by more than 95%. And as a result of that, he was able to increase the number of surgeries in India alone from 400,000 to over 5 million in the space of 10 years. So that to me was just an incredible example of an entrepreneur and how they can make a difference, right? And so when I met David in 2008, he was already very successful. And I said, so how can I help you? And he said, well, I really need help to raise a fund to take this idea around the world. And so my first assignment was to help him raise an investment fund to take his technology and his product and take it to several other countries around the world. And he was able to raise 30 million euros in finance, which enabled him to then replicate that product and that service all over the world. And that was really the beginning of my journey into impact finance and the power of what this is and what it could do. And so I've been doing that ever since with Ashoka. And we've now raised over $250 million for more than 100 enterprises. And so we've made a lot of mistakes along the way. We've learned a lot of lessons about how to do this. And I'm super happy to share some of those today.
Yes, in fact, indeed. In fact, I think in last few months, you have added $50 million to the portfolio that you have managed so far, which is incredible. I mean, like this means that you see opportunity even in challenges. So definitely my next question is, you worked with so many social entrepreneurs, you have helped them pitch their ideas, you've raised more than $250 million for them. What are the qualities that you see in people who succeed in raising funds or raising investments? And what are some of the common mistakes that should be avoided?
Okay. So as I said, we've helped bring many entrepreneurs to pitch in front of investors. And one of the frustrating things for me, to be quite honest, is that the best ideas do not always win out, right? It really matters how you convey the idea and what you present. And so it's a lot of it is just simply understanding investor psychology and how to convey what it is that you want to convey. So let me just quickly describe some of the common mistakes that people make, and then just give you a couple of tips. Okay, so the first mistake that I see countless entrepreneurs make when they're pitching is that they think that what they're pitching is a product. Right. In other words, they think that what you're supposed to do is go in and start straight away by describing your product or your service and then selling that to an investor. And the reason why that's a mistake is because there are several things that you have to do first in order to prepare the ground for this, right? You have to explain what is the problem you're trying to solve. You have to convey the importance of that problem. You have to talk about the number of people in the world who are suffering from heart disease or chronic disease or diabetes or whatever it is that you're trying to tackle. You have to then describe and put that into context so that people know this is a serious problem with a big market potential and that it's important, right? And then there's something really important that people miss when for early stage companies, and I assume most people on this call are early stage or developing their ideas, and it's this: what really matters when you're pitching to an investor or indeed to any audience is not so much your product, it is your insight into how to solve a specific problem, right? So in other words, anybody can get up there and sell a cardiac machine or a new scanner or whatever it is, right? And investors get bombarded with thousands of these products. So it's not like that's particularly interesting. So what an investor needs to hear is, here is a major problem in the world today. And it's not currently being solved in the right way. And the reason why it's not being solved in the right way is because people don't understand this, right? Where this is some insight or some issue or some challenge which you have as an entrepreneur and which is a deep understanding of the root causes of that problem. So if you've got that insight and you can explain that really well, almost like a TED Talk style to somebody, then the product should naturally just fall out of that and just make sense. And so let me just give you one example of this. An entrepreneur that I've had the privilege to work with a number of years back, Simon Berry, who's the founder of an organization called Cola Life. And what Simon was working on, he was an entrepreneur working in Zambia. And the issue he's trying to address was diarrhea, which is the biggest killer of women and children worldwide, right? And the paradox is that it shouldn't be, because it's solvable with a very, very simple solution. You know, oral rehydration salts, right? A small sachet of that, you know, fixes most problems. And yet countless people are dying every year needlessly as a result of this. So Simon's question was not, what product do I need to do to solve this? Because we know what the product is. It's the oral rehydration salt, right? His question was, why are people dying? Why are people dying? And his analysis was that people are dying because these oral rehydration salts are not being sold in the quantity, size, and price at which people can afford them, right? So essentially, you know, the product is being shipped to hospitals and clinics, which may be 100 miles away if you're living in rural Uganda from a family or a village where somebody is suffering from this issue. When they get out to that hospital, it's going to be very intimidating for them. They're going to have to go in and see doctors and nurses. The price point is nowhere near affordable for them. And this medicine is dispensed in bulk and then brought, you know, and then given by nurses to them, right? So he's saying we have to completely reinvent the supply chain. What we should be doing is selling these as small little sachets that you can buy in your local shop, from your local shop, like shampoo or something like that, where people will go in naturally every day. They can just walk to the corner store, they can buy it, and it costs a couple of pence, right? But no one was selling it like that. So when you break down the problem and understand why the customers are not being served, because of the price point, the delivery, the distribution, the design, and so on, it becomes quite clear what the answer is. It's a different kind of packaging of this product with a different price point in that way, right? So what matters is not him going out there and saying, hey, listen, do you want to, you know, I've got a company that sells sachets of oral dehydration salts. It's nobody is fixing the problem because they don't understand this critical insight. This is my insight, and therefore I'm going to create a service and delivery that's going to match the insight. So it's the insight which is the most important thing for you to sell and pitch, and that's probably going to be my number one tip in terms of you know, what people are sort of missing out on.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. In fact, very right. People are always focused on products. And today, one of the models that in the for-profit world, which is actually leveling up quite a bit, is aggregator model, because a lot of things already exist. So aggregators are playing up, just looking at the products and bringing them together and offering it at a more affordable and accessible way. So very correct. Just because you were talking a lot about, I mean, you are an advisor of social finance. So of course, my next very natural question is, what kind of funds and resources are useful to watch out for future?
Yeah, okay, great. So a couple of things to bear in mind, okay? So most people think that if you're raising funds for a project, that there's only one type of finance that you should be going for. And so if you're a commercial project, you might be looking for equity or debt. If you're an NGO, you might be thinking about grants and so on. The first thing to make people aware of is that if you are a social entrepreneur, by definition, you fall in the middle. You have a mission, you're trying to solve a social problem, but presumably you're also a business as well, or you have some kind of revenue model or some kind of commercial model. So the first thing I would say is don't fall into the trap of thinking that it's either or, that you either have to be a charity and raise grants, or that you have to be a business and raise equity. Many successful models have been able to blend both. You know, maybe they start off with grants at the beginning because that's the fastest way to get R&D done. And it doesn't require payback. So you're not under pressure to deliver returns quickly, which can be a big problem. But at a certain stage, maybe you do want to access commercial finance in the form of angel finance or VC or private equity in order to be able to give you the fuel to get to the next level, right? Because the normal sequence is raise grants and get subsidy in order to launch and pilot. And then gradually develop a revenue model that's going to make your project sustainable, and then move on from there to scaling up, which is when you need to raise, you know, investment money, equity, and so on. So at the point where you're looking for $3 to $5 million, you're probably going to need commercial finance because there's not a lot of philanthropy out there sustainably that can provide that. But it doesn't mean you have to start off that way. It doesn't mean you have to start off being a commercial business and do a VC. So I mentioned the example of David Greene at the beginning, the eye care entrepreneur that I was speaking about. Of the 10 businesses that he's launched, I think he's always launched them using philanthropy first. I think he's always gone and found a philanthropist or a donor who'd be willing to write him a grant, a check, in order for him just to be able to experiment and just prove the model without the pressure of financial return. And then from that point, once he's proved viability, he's then been able to raise millions of dollars in equity and commercial finance. And it's well over $100 million now for many of his ventures. But he was very, very successful at starting with the right kind of finance and then scaling up. So I would encourage people on this call, think about the different options that you've got for doing this. It's much, much more than just equity or debt. There might be grant funding. It might be crowdfunding. You know, I mean, increasingly we live in a world where you can put your project online, and people from all over the world will back you, Kickstarter and so on. So these are becoming increasingly mainstream and viable forms of finance for what you're doing. Another source of finance is corporate funding. And we've got a lot of intrapreneurs on this call as well, right? So your natural first place to look might be your own corporate, or it might be companies that want to sponsor projects because they see it as good citizen value, or they see it as potentially R&D development for themselves in terms of creating this. And that might include corporate sponsorship, you know. So, you know, one of our projects that we're working with runs micro clinics in Nairobi. And they've been able to raise sponsorship from companies like Boehringer Ingelheim, from Merck, and others, because these are great projects to support. You know, they're on the ground providing primary healthcare for citizens. And which company wouldn't want to buy goodwill, you know, or be associated with that? So as a social entrepreneur, you actually have brand value, which potentially could be very attractive for the right kind of backer as well. So please do bear in mind all of these possibilities: sponsorship, philanthropy, crowdfunding. You've got a lot of tools in the funding toolkit to draw upon. So please be creative about those options.
Yes, yes, certainly. We will be posting the social toolkit that you have, social financing toolkit that you have developed in the discussion forum, so that everybody can access that toolkit. But yes, just because we are talking about financing and you beautifully explained a few things, I'm going to take a question from one of the Ashoka fellows from Zambia, Muzalema, and she asks, when is the best time to pitch for funding? Is it when you have an idea that is all fleshed out, or when you are designing it?
Oh, okay. In my view, the answer is this. The best time to start raising funding is when you actually have some proof that the idea works. It's very, very hard to raise funding when it's just an idea. And so you have to find a way to finance the development of the idea. And I'll come back to that in just a moment. How do you bootstrap yourself in that very first phase? But when you're talking about raising, let's say, more than $100,000 in finance, I personally believe that the ideal time, if this is possible, it may not be possible, right, is actually when you actually have a first customer. The reason is because if you develop a product or a service and you've gone and tried it out, no investor actually knows whether you actually have any success or not, right? But the moment that a customer actually went and bought that product, suddenly you have validation for the first time. And when that happens, the probability of your organization succeeding has just gone up exponentially. It's 10 times greater than when it was just an idea, right? So you don't want to raise funding too early, because if you do, even if you did raise the funding, it would be incredibly expensive, given how how little people know about whether it's going to succeed or not. But if you can wait until you've got the point when you got your first customer or your first 10 customers, or you've got some revenue, at that point, it's no longer a shot in the dark. It's suddenly, it's people actually buying this, right? And it doesn't matter if it's a lot of people. The point is that somebody's started to buy it and thinks it could actually add value to them. So that's already a quantum difference between you and the pure blue sky thinking, right? So the question then becomes, how do you survive to that point? How do you get through the first 6 months or a year or 2 years even before you actually get to a first customer? Because you have this development phase that you have to go through, this pilot phase. And this is really hard. Okay, I'm not going to pretend that it's not hard. In the early phase, it is almost impossible to get somebody who doesn't know you already to invest in you. And that's because they have no evidence of success. So therefore, the way in which you raise funding for that first 18 months is that there's only, I think, 3 or 4 ways that you can do it. Number one, you can bootstrap it, which is just a fancy way of saying you have to pay it yourself. You work for free, you work weekends, you work nights, you know, or you take income from another project and you put it into this, your own money, right? Now that's unfortunately often the only way of doing it. The next way is you do what we call the friends and family approach. You ask people who know you already whether they would be interested in supporting the project. And essentially what they're doing is they're backing it, not because of the idea, because no one knows whether the idea is going to work. They're backing it because they know you, they trust you, and it's your personal integrity that draws them in, or your personal track record that draws them in. And then the third way is if you are lucky enough to be an entrepreneur who has already launched something before, or you've already got an existing project, to go to the backers of that original project and ask them whether they would be interested in supporting you on this new idea. And usually that is the best way for an existing entrepreneur who already has 1 or 2 projects under their belt to raise money for the new project. It's very rare to go and find strangers who will do this. But somebody who already backed you on something you've already done, they've already seen you in action, they already know what you're like, those people may be very receptive to backing you again on your new idea. And again, they're doing it because it's you. They're not doing it because, you know, the new idea, right? Because at this point, who knows about the new idea. So I think the early stages is nearly always personal contacts, personal connections, and people who already have backed you before. And then the new and then the takeoff moment is when you have the validation, which normally means the first customer who's come on board and independently bought your product and says this, and you know, hopefully given you a good testimonial on that as well. So I would break out the funding to those 2 steps: friends and family, people who know you, and then post customer, post revenue, you know, then look for the scaling up. Yeah.
Great, great, great. Just because we are talking about pitching, there is one more question that has come from Christina from Switzerland, so I'm going to take that. Does a pitch with a social impact differentiate between a pitch that is only profitable or like has a profitable goal?
I think the answer is it depends, and it really depends on who you're pitching to. So I think that many of the impact investors kind of fall into a spectrum, right? So some of them will basically be profit focused, and for them it's really the same pitch whether it's a business or a social, you know, mission driven organization. What they need to see is a certain level of financial return, and then they look for impact around that. At the other end of the spectrum, there are people who essentially are looking for impact first. And these people are basically philanthropists, people who would already write a check for free if they could see massive impact. But what they're doing is they're saying, but if you can offer me the money back and some kind of investment, then I can potentially write you an even bigger check. So for those people, you have to demonstrate the impact. But really with this kind of pitch, it's really both. It's both your project actually creates significant impact, but also your project is going to be financially viable. And that's the difference between an NGO and a social business. A social business you know, an NGO just promises impact. A social business promises impact, but also a sustainable business model. In other words, it will generate enough revenue to at least cover its costs and break even. And the attractiveness of that proposition is that the investor only puts their money in once, and then you just keep growing, or you just keep going with the capital being recycled through earned income. And so you have to be able to explain that there is a business model here which can eventually cover its costs. That is the thing to explain. But you must also prove that you got massive impact as well.
Great, great. Just a housekeeping thing that
Mm.
maybe because of internet's instability at my end, there is a little bit of longer pause that people might be experiencing. In case I drop off the connection, the backstage team will take over, and Mark is going to continue with his insights. Mark, I think I will now move on to the next question, which is about partnerships. The thing is that when we look at pitching, idea development, or pitching, it is not just finance. It is also, there are diverse stakeholders there. It's not just selling your idea, it is also collaborating, making people believe that your idea has merits. And that is why it is important for us to know what are the best practices in designing and establishing partnerships, and why.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and I think it's one that many of my clients, are constantly sort of thinking about and trying to evolve answers on. Let me just give a couple of pointers on partnerships. I think there are many different ways to approach this, right? Um, the first one is, I think it's really important for you as an entrepreneur to almost design in advance what the ideal partnership for you looks like. So one of the mistakes that people make is that they kind of just blunder out there and they just see, oh, who's doing what, who can match up with us, how can we work with these guys, what can we do with UNICEF, whatever it might be, right? And that's a
Yes.
very random approach to growing your organization or building. I think a much better approach is to say, this is the organization that we have right now, and this is the product we have right now.
Mhm.
And for us, the ideal partner would be dot, 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 where you almost design it, right? And then you say, this is, this is a healthcare product, which really is going to be great for rural communities. Let's say you're doing telemedicine, right? So your ideal partner it's a chain of rural clinics operating in these areas with this much footfall and coverage, which looks like this, 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 and this. So in other
Mm.
words, even before you go out and actually find a real world partner, write down on a piece of paper what an ideal partner would look like and what way that they would bring to the table for you. Okay,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
once you go out there, you can very easily be blown off course, and then you suddenly discover that you're working with the wrong people, right? So step one, work
Yes.
out what your ideal partnership is. Step two, work out the ideal way in which you would want to interact with them. So in other words, don't go in and just say, here's us, what do you guys do? How can we work together? It
Yeah.
almost might be to say, listen, we can deliver 5,000 syringes per week or per day, to this quality and standard, et cetera, et cetera. We just need a warehouse, or we just need a place to deliver it, and so on. So you almost design like I call it a social API. You know how with apps, an API basically defines how do you work with this app, how do you plug in to this app.
Mhm.
You almost want to do that for your organization. You almost want to say, how does a partner plug in and connect with what we do?
Mhm.
Do they require delivery points where you can provide stock and service? Do they require what form of delivery, how, et cetera, et cetera? What are the terms and conditions for that? And again, write this out as a protocol, right? So how
Mm.
do we work with you? What are the best ways for us to do this? What information do we need from you? And what format should that information come in, right? So you basically just make that really, really easy. Um, and then my final tip would be standardize the contract. So don't go out there with just like any contract, or even worse, no contract, and just negotiate case by case. Because when you get to scale, you don't have time to go and negotiate 1,000 contracts. You almost just want to
Yes.
say, for the right partner, this is our contract. These are the terms. This is what we can offer you, and this is how you do it. And give them a menu of options, but the menu should be fixed. With very limited variability, right? Because when you standardize, you've got to be able to say, if you want to buy from us or you want to sell to us, this is what these are. This is how we do it, and make it very easy for yourself. And if you've got those three things, standardized protocols for how to work with you, contracts that materialize that, and a sense on who you want to work with, you're going to be much better set up to roll out and scale up, right? You don't have to make it random. You don't have to work your way forward into doing this, and you can also know who you say no to as well. It's really important to say no to people, and only work with the best organizations, because if you tie up all your capacity of your organization, with substandard contracts or irrelevant partners or inappropriate partners, then that's really your business capacity absorbed for the next couple of years, and that's a really big problem. So I think working out in advance who you want to work with and how is time really well spent.
Great, great. Mark, your business intelligence quotient is uncomparable. So I'm like, of course, like, entrepreneurs who are like newbies, it'll be very difficult for them to kind of arrive at these conclusions that you are sharing at the moment, especially because you're also having an economics background. So you will know what is the return on investment to look at, or what is the social impact that can be delivered, how to validate things. These are really difficult choices, or even for that matter, when somebody is designing it, it is difficult for somebody to even imagine it. So my next question is, if you're an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, what is the first step, and how do you make sure partnerships that are designing are strategic, so that we know that we are moving towards a certain goal?
Yeah, so it's a difficult one, that, because I think it very much depends on the nature of the organization that you've got. And I think that there are probably two kinds of organizations that we can talk about. So there are ones that are really clear on their strategy, right? They know what is their theory of change, and they know already how to move those levers and what they're doing. So for those kinds of organizations, they know the kind of partner that they want or that they need. And it would be, it may be a company, for example, that wants to change a particular aspect of the health system, right? And in order to do that, they essentially need to get the buy-in of the Ministry of Health in a particular country. Maybe it's a company or an organization that wants to change the way that government hospitals do procurement, for example. So for them, it's clear you must have a strategy where your partner is the Ministry of Health. And what you need to do is work out what does it take to persuade the Ministry of Health to be convinced in your idea. And so that's where the leverage is, or that's where it is, right? But for many other types of organizations, I'm thinking here about product companies, service companies, and so on. It's much less about that, and you're not trying to change legislation, and you're not trying to change something at that kind of macro level. So for those kinds of organizations, yeah, I think it's much more important not to lock yourself in, but to adopt an evolutionary approach to how your business model should evolve, right? And the secret to an evolutionary approach is basically step by step, very small. Okay, so don't go out and just sign up one partner and that's your partner for the next 5 years, just doing the entire budget, right? It would be to find a partner and say, okay, we think your hospitals here are really interesting, and we could really work with your 10 hospitals in this region. Why don't we try a pilot together where we just roll out our innovation and we both see how this works, and that's very low risk for everybody, right? So you try it out, and you offer one contract, and you don't overpromise, and you just keep it small, and you learn a ton from each other about that, and you learn whether that they have the quality that you need, and whether you're good to work with, and so on, and then just do it step by step. Just do that contract, and then see, oh, what else could we offer you? Well, we sold you our hearing aid product, but would you be interested in our orthopedic product as well? And just build from there and incrementally evolve and grow. Or you may decide that we did that contract, but actually those guys weren't really the right ones for us, and we now realize that we shouldn't be in government hospitals, we should be in private clinics. Okay, so you've learned something, and you can now evolve the next partnership in that direction, right? But for organizations that really don't know how they're going to scale up to 1 million customers, or don't have a macro strategy as I described it, this evolutionary approach is I think the safest and the best way of homing in on your best business model.
I completely agree. Evolutionary is definitely, I mean, if you see, sometimes some things that you plan may not be relevant, like 5 years plan, 10 years plan, sometimes can completely crash. So I completely agree with that.
If you're a startup and you've got a 5-year plan, throw it away. That is crazy. I mean, look, we're living in a COVID world where all plans just got incinerated, right? So your secret is agility. It is not brilliant planning. So just anyone out there who thinks,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I was, in fact, sometimes when you're even looking at systemic change, so you will have to look at agile approach, which I think
Yeah.
in one of your sessions you mentioned. So my next question is, how can entrepreneurs be prepared to manage the change that will emerge, for example, in the coming months or during the year, given the current situation?
Yeah. I think partly it's mindset. I think entrepreneurs, at least the entrepreneurs that I've been working with, have come out of this even more energized and active than many other organizations. I think a lot of people are in shell shock by what's happened around the world, and that's completely understandable. If you're a startup entrepreneur, you've always been living in an environment where things change very rapidly, and you're kind of developing as you go. And so people with an entrepreneurial mindset have just been much more comfortable with going, okay, my plans for the next 6 months have now changed. We've got to find the new normal and work out where to go from here. So that is actually a mindset, thing, right? The truth is, I personally believe that everybody in the world is in that situation, whether you're in a big company or a small company or a startup. The world can change tomorrow. We just seen this. We just witnessed this ourselves for the first time. And therefore you have to be willing to say, okay, all bets are off. What do we now need to do? And so it is the ability to pivot, which is key. And so it's working out, what does it mean in this new environment? What's changed for your customers? What's changed in terms of their needs? What's changed in terms of what they need right now and what they'll need in 6 months? And what they'll need when they come back, when the markets come back and people are back out of lockdown. Yeah, so all of those things are critical, and then working out, so what can you do to adapt what you're doing now to those needs? And for people who are able to make that adaptation, and in healthcare, I think it's probably one of the best areas to make this, then actually the opportunities are huge. And also the money is available. None of the healthcare entrepreneurs that I've been working with in the last 6 months or in the last 4 months have actually struggled when it comes to fundraising, bizarrely, as long as they're able to present a compelling case of why they're relevant in the current COVID environment, right? And that could be either because their product or service is immediately applicable to the front line, or because it's quite clear that in 6 months' time, that new systems will require their solution, or an adapted version of that. And so, if you're able to make that case, do not fall into the trap of thinking that the money supply has turned off. It has not. In some ways, it's even more urgent and more available right now. So that's something which I would recommend.
Yeah. Okay, great. We have 2 categories of audience who are watching us today, intrapreneurs and entrepreneurs. So we have a common question from most of them. Is there a difference when entrepreneurs pitch project or intrapreneurs kind of pitch projects? Because intrapreneurs probably will be doing it within the company, or maybe stakeholders who are known, and entrepreneurs will have to go out to external partnerships. So do you have any insights on that?
I think there are some differences, but much less than people might think. At the end of the day, you're doing the same thing. You're inviting an audience to back you. The only question is whether that audience is an external group of angel investors or VCs, or whether that audience is an internal one, which is your committee that you're answerable to. And in both cases, you're inviting support, whether it's in the form of money or resources or allocation of an internal budget, but you still have to essentially make the same moves, in order to make them work. I think that intrapreneurs potentially have the advantage that they can tap into other resources. They've got marketing teams and product teams, and so that is one difference. The other difference is that if you're an intrapreneur, presumably you're not starting from scratch. You are already you're in a company that has products and services, and I presume that what you're innovating is something which is relevant for that company, or builds on what that company is already doing. Whereas if you are a startup entrepreneur, it's just you and your idea. You have no other resources around you, and you have to go and outsource all those resources and buy them in. So an entrepreneur potentially starts off with a higher base already because they're already plugged into a resource base. But essentially, same challenges though. You still have to persuade people that your idea is a good one. You still have to persuade people to allocate budget to you, whether it's internal or external, and you still have to make prove the case that you've got. So I would say very similar in that sense.
Great, great. We've talked a lot about pitching. Now, pitching is just an idea. You need to prototype so that people can validate it. So my next question is, prototyping, do you have like, what is the best practices around prototyping? How can somebody get started with prototyping an idea?
Yeah, sure. So at Ashoka, we've been doing a lot of work with accelerators where we're looking at what is the best way to bring a product or service to market, particularly a social product. So something which is going to create a lot of social impact as well as be financially viable. And one of the insights that actually I've been thinking about quite recently is the idea that it's probably best to put in stages the different things that you're trying to bring to market. Okay, so let me just give you an example of what do I mean by that. Supposing you've got a new idea for a product, a medical product, and or indeed a business model innovation, right? And you want to demonstrate in 6 months' time that this product is going to be attractive and that you want to raise investment for it, okay? So you've got a period of time in which you need to demonstrate certain hypotheses about that product. What do you need to demonstrate? You need to demonstrate, for example, that firstly, that it works, that it actually creates clinical impact, okay? So that's one obvious thing that is, otherwise there's no point. But that is nowhere near enough. What you then have to demonstrate is that somebody will buy it, right? Because there's no point having a perfect product that's going to make massive impact, but actually no one buys it, okay? And that means you've got to get the price point right, you've got to get the design right, and you've got to get the delivery right. You've got to make sure that it's being sold in the right place, you know, in the right channels, you know, before a customer gets there. So by the time that a product is ready for a customer to buy, so many things have to be proven. You know, that it's got the right price point, that it's got the right design, that it's being sold in the right place, that it makes the right impact, et cetera, right? All these things. And if you try and validate all those things at the same time, it's actually very hard, because maybe you went out to this village and you sold your medicine or your device or whatever it might be, right? And guess what? No one bought it, okay? So at that point, you don't know whether you failed because the price was wrong, because you were selling it in hospitals when you should have been selling it in shops, whether there's something fundamentally wrong with the design, and that everyone hates the color and the noise, or whatever it might be, right? So what you have to do is almost break it out into little steps. You have to say, okay, here's my product, and I'm going to give it out for free, because I don't want to talk about price. I just want to know whether people like it or whether it makes any difference, right? So you give it out for free, 10 people try it, and they report back, this product works. It actually improved my health. It helped me with my diabetes, whatever it might be. Okay, tick the box. Clinical impact works. Then you might go out and go, okay, I want to test whether where this product sells best. Should I have salespeople selling it door to door? Should I have people selling it in hospitals and clinics or whatever it might be? And try that out. And you guess what? The salespeople who go door to door sell 1,000 products, and no one buys it in the shop or in the hospital. Okay, so now you know distribution channel. And then finally, you go, okay, maybe, I don't know whether the price point should be $200 or $100. Let's just try a range of different things and see. And so basically, if you can stagger it out in this way, you will rapidly zone in on the different areas where you can validate. And so I would recommend a very scientific approach to bringing the product to market. So, you know, validate the clinical impact first, then validate maybe the delivery and design, and then validate a price point and payment method, you know, and so on. And so, but start with impact and then move to commercial as you go, right? It's important to know that this creates impact. Without that, there's no social model, right? But then you have to get to commercial, and then you have to work out all the stuff that a commercial entrepreneur needs: price point, design, packaging, payment method, and so on. And so there's a lot of things you have to prove. But splitting it out and working towards that will help save you a lot of time and money.
Correct. In fact, we have A very interesting question from Marianka Pol from Germany. She asked, when do you know your idea has failed?
That's a really great question. Hmm. It's possible that you never really do, because, do you know that, did the idea fail because it's a bad idea, or did it fail because you executed it poorly? And how do you know which is which, right? Would it have worked if you had just got the price point right? Would it have worked, but if you had sold it in a different place, or to a different type of customer, and you didn't realize what your market was? Um, I think that the truth is that it's one of those questions that you may never know the answer to. But that kind of scientific approach that I mentioned about testing different aspects of the idea will help you become more and more informed about it, right? And that's why I recommend testing, the validity of the idea for impact before you test the commercial aspects of the idea itself, and try and give yourself many opportunities to do the experiments before, as you get better and better. So if you stagnate out in the stages that I described, then to the extent that you can, right? You can't always do this in this very clinical way that I've described. Then that at least maximizes your chances of knowing where did you fail, because that's actually the most important question. It's not does the idea work or not. It's never binary. The question is, where did you fail? What aspect of execution let you down? And so you have to have methodology to find that out.
Great, great. I'm going to take the last question for the session because we have two very important concluding questions, and we are just 15 minutes away from the end of the session. But yes, we have Christina from Romania, and she asks, what is more attractive to investors, how you market idea or your financial plans?
Oh, it's not your financial plans. Okay, so finance is the very last thing that you should mention to an investor. Okay, because it's almost counterintuitively, finance is not the most important thing when you're talking to an investor. What matters is convincing them of the power of your idea, the effectiveness of your idea, and the quality of your execution and implementation of that idea, right? If you can convince them of those three things, there's a great idea here, it really will make a difference, and you are the team that is best set up to make it happen, right? Then the final question of how much money do you need is almost like what check do you need from me, okay? If you don't have those three things, it's irrelevant how much money you need. You're not going to raise the money. So so spend 90% of your time on the quality of your plan, execution, and how you're going to bring it to market. And then in the last 10 minutes, and in order to make this happen, we need $1 million in the form of equity, which we're going to spend in the following way. And that's how you do it. But do not come in with that at the beginning, because frankly, no one cares, right? We need $1 million and we're going to do, it's equity and you get half our company. But if they don't even know what the business concept is and how you're going to make it real, you're actually leading the cart before the horse. So finance at the end. If you win on the other three, the finance is just an afterthought. So yeah, that's the dirty secret of finance. It's actually the least important aspect of what you should be pitching.
I agree, because otherwise you would not have a startup boom. The entire startup world was startup because on this fact, that it's the power of our idea.
Yeah,
and
actually,
not finance.
Could I also just mention just one more thing on that as well, which is that I see people get very hung up on financial projections, right? And and they think that the way to convince an investor is to show a really impressive graph that shows, today we're losing money, but in 5 years' time we're going to be a $13 million a year company, and they show this wonderful hockey stick. Okay. That actually is not the way to convince an investor, and it's actually not very helpful to you to show very massive projections going into the sky, because the truth is that everybody knows that the 5-year forecast is just a set of numbers that you kind of make up, right? And so you can make up a number as well as an investor. So the way to do it and to win credibility is to show assumptions on how you can build over time, and to be really clear about what those assumptions are. And credibility comes not from massive numbers, but from being really thoughtful about how you're going to grow. So as an investor myself, it's much more important for me to see a well thought through set of possibilities rather than this is our business plan. We're going to be $50 million a year in 5 years, and here's a hockey stick graph to show. So don't worry about big numbers. Don't worry about crazy IRRs and those kinds of things. I personally, as an investor, find it very, very compelling when an entrepreneur says to me, this is what I think will happen over the next 5 years based on the following assumptions. And if things go wrong, this could be how it would play out. And if things go well, this could be how it would play out. I need $1 million from you. And let me just show you what would be the minimum that would have to happen for me to be able to repay you, right? And so showing the minimum case, which is that today we sell 1,000 products, but we only have to sell 1,300 in the next 3 years, per year for the next 3 years, and your loan is repaid. Look how safe that is. Look how easy that is. We're going to blow through those targets, right? But so you're going to be okay. That to me is a very convincing argument. And so I would encourage people to think about minimum case and break even rather than massive growth.
I'm going to take the last question, which is the most important one for this session. I think a lot of people are waiting, but yes, I mean, you gave a very interesting insights. I think the mutual funds in the business world or in the banking works like that, as just like you said, so the mutual funds, if people want to just go and see how they perform, this is exactly what Mark is saying. This is exactly what his education has done. He's an investment banker, so he uses that intelligence. So Mark, as a creator of social investment toolkit, can you translate the key elements of the toolkit for entrepreneurs innovating within a company that can be relevant during the emergence of new normal?
Oh, okay. In the next 3 minutes, right? So it's going to be very quick. So for the benefit of your audience, I've written a set of tools which you can go to online and find at socialinvestmenttoolkit.com. That's socialinvestmenttoolkit.com. And essentially, it's a free online guide for entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs in how to basically bring a product to market and raise investment for it. Okay, so it's full of case studies on from the Ashoka network and from many other networks in how to do it. And essentially, it's split out into 8 modules, which describes the process from ideation all the way through to the final pitch and closing the investment. If I was to sort of truncate that down into a very short, concise thing, one of the things that we're trying to explain in that toolkit is that in order to make a successful pitch, there are certain key elements in a story which investors or your audience needs to hear. And also the order in which you structure that story is very important, because essentially it answers the questions in the minds of your audience in the order in which they arise, okay? So I don't have time to really go into that methodology, but basically the order seems to be as follows. And this is kind of distilling thousands of pitches that we've seen work well and which ones don't work well. But the ones that seem to succeed tell a story with the following elements in this order, okay? Number 1, the problem that you're trying to solve and why it's important and why it's big, okay? And then immediately following on from that, the insight that you have into why that problem exists, okay? So the insight is the critical piece. Next, it is what is the product or solution that you are bringing to market which solves that problem? And that product or market, you must explain in the context of the insight that you've just described. So remember my example with Simon Berry and the diarrhea medicine, right? His insight was that it's not being sold in the right places, in the right format. Your product must basically answer that question, right? So that's number 2, the product fit, right? Number 3 is basically, okay, you've got the product. How are you going to get this to scale? What is your plan for getting this to 1 million customers? And what do you need in order to get there? Oh, we have to build these factories, and then we have to have a sales force delivering it in so on that way, right? So basically, you're going to spell out your business plan, your growth plan. And then the final piece is the ask. So having spelled out that what you're going to do, that naturally means that you've now got, okay, and we need $1 million to do this. And now you basically give your shopping list of things that you need. And then you explain what you need. And that's why I said finance comes at the end. Okay, it's the last bit, not the first bit of that. And if you can structure the story and the pitch using those 4 narrative beats, it's very, very helpful from an investor's perspective, because it kind of naturally flows as a story. So so have a think about that in the context of your own project and see whether you can fit it in that way. But you may find that's a very effective way of making that pitch.
Correct. Thank you so much, Mark. I mean, I can go on asking you lots of questions, but unfortunately, we are coming to a close of the session. But I will still ask you one more question: do you have any parting advice for the newbies or like the new entrepreneurs who are watching us?
Well, actually, it was a comment that I think Indrani, we were talking about just before this webinar started, which is in response to the extraordinary situation that we're in right now, where the whole world is kind of like in shell shock. And I fervently believe that this period will create some of the most exciting entrepreneurial new businesses and ideas born in this time right now that we will see in a century. I'm seeing this with my own clients right now who are bringing extraordinary ideas to market. And so there is literally no better moment in the world than right now to be an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur. The upside actually bizarrely is huge, and the downside is very low, just given how everything is changing right now. So I think the opportunity is there. So for all of you who are coming into this and starting out for the first time, congratulations. This is the moment to be doing this, and it's going to be there. Secondly, don't. A lot of people are very paralyzed right now. They're saying there's no money out there. People don't want to spend. Not true for the right ideas. So if you've got an idea which is relevant and powerful right now, people are willing and eager and keen to find you. So please do bear that in mind. In fact, I'm going to leave you with a tip. There's a website I recommend called COVIDcap.com, COVIDcap.com, which is a database that's been put up by Duke University of many, many funders who are out there looking right now for entrepreneurial solutions to COVID in some way or another. And that includes grants as well as investment. So for those of you who are looking for funders, do take a look at their website. It's very good database, and I believe it's updated regularly on that. So that, along with my social investment toolkit, please do go. Those two, I think will give you a very good base for working. But great time to be an entrepreneur. And goodness knows that we have the need for it right now. So you're needed as well. And I wish everyone on this call really the very best of luck in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Mark. Your insights, your business intelligence, and all your tips have been incredibly, at least has taught me incredibly, and I'm sure it will teach all our learners a lot of new things. We are going to be posting all of the resources that you have told us just now, whether it is the toolkit or whether it is the Capcom. Our backend team is going to be posting that in the discussion forum so that people can explore, our participants can explore. But thank you very much. And before we wrap up, I just want to make sure that I remind everybody of a few things. The module 4 and 5 have assignments, and we are in the process of reviewing those who have submitted. If you have not started the assignments, please start them so that we can start reviewing. You can also review your peer assignments, and of course, during the office hours, we are going to tell you how you can look at peer assignments also. The office hours are scheduled. The office hour for this week is scheduled for 21st May, and I shall be your host along with my co-facilitator, Sharon Vekvati. And so join us for a conversation with your peers. And don't forget to tune in next week for the last webinar for the season, hosted by my colleague, Sharon Vekvati. Thank you very much for watching us live. Don't forget to take the survey to get your credit points, and have a great day.